I walked out of that courtroom on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday where the sky in Asheville is so flat and gray you can't tell where the morning ends and the afternoon begins. I was wearing the navy blue dress my husband had bought me for our 45th anniversary, and I remember thinking, as the courthouse doors closed behind me, that I'd never wear it again. Not because it didn't fit, because every thread of it still smelled like the man I used to know. His name was Walter. We were married for 51 years. He left me at 76. He left me for a woman named Clarissa, who used to do our taxes. He took the house on Beaver Dam Road that we built in 1987, the one with the slate roof and the wraparound porch and the dogwood I planted. The spring our youngest started kindergarten. He took the lake property in Hendersonville. He took the IRA we both worked our whole lives to fill. And on the day I came home and found my suitcases lined up in the foyer like coffins, he stood there in the doorway with his arms crossed and said very calmly, "You should go quietly, Eleanor. The children are with me on this. You'll never see your grandchildren again." Then he laughed. Not a big laugh. A small, dry, satisfied laugh. The kind a man makes when he thinks he's already won. I left that night. I drove to a Hampton Inn off I-40, and I sat on the edge of the bed for 2 hours without crying. I didn't cry because crying felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. I had $312 in my checking account. Walter had moved the rest. I didn't know that yet, but I knew it the way you know a storm is coming before the sky changes. Something in the pressure of the air. I want to tell you what happened next, because I think a lot of women my age are sitting on the edge of a Hampton Inn bed somewhere right now, and I want them to know what came after. The next morning, I called my sister Bernadette. Bernie is 2 years younger than me and has the kind of voice that could talk a hostage situation down. She lives in Charlotte. She's been widowed since 2011, and she has never once, in all the years I've known her, told me what to do. She listens, and then she asks one question, and the one question is always the one I needed somebody to ask. That morning, after I told her everything, the suitcases, the laugh, the threat about the grandchildren, Bernie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Eleanor, did Walter ever once let you see the bank statements?" I sat there in that motel room with the phone pressed against my ear, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd looked at one. He handled the money. He'd always handled the money. He was an engineer. I was a high school English teacher. He said the math made his brain happy and made mine ache, and I let him. I let him for 51 years. "No," I said. "I never asked." "Then we're going to ask now," Bernie said. "Pack your things. Come to Charlotte. We're going to find you a real attorney." Not anybody Walter could have gotten to first. I want to be honest with you. I almost didn't go. I sat in that motel room for another 40 minutes and I thought about how tired I was and how my back hurt, and how at 76 maybe the right thing was to just take whatever Walter was willing to give me and disappear quietly into a one-bedroom apartment somewhere and feed birds for the rest of my life. I thought maybe fighting would just embarrass me, make me look bitter, make the children, my children, our children, hate me even more than they already seemed to. But then I thought about the dogwood tree. I thought about how I planted it on a Saturday in April of 1981, kneeling in the soft red mud with our youngest, Caroline, standing behind me holding the watering can. I thought about how that tree had grown for 42 years on land Walter was now going to hand to a woman who'd done our taxes. And something in me that had been very quiet for a very long time stood up. I got in the car. I drove to Charlotte. Bernie's attorney's name was Marion Vesper. She had silver hair cut short like a man's, and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and an office on the 7th floor of a building downtown that smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish. She listened to me for almost an hour without writing anything down. When I was finished, she took off her glasses, set them on the desk, and said, "Mrs. Holloway, I have to ask you some questions, and I need you to understand that I'm not asking them to upset you. I'm asking them because they're going to win or lose this case. Do you understand?" I said I did. "How long has your husband been planning this?" I started to say I didn't know. But then I stopped. Because I did know. I knew when I sat down and let myself think about it. There had been the long weekends, fishing with his old college roommate, Except his old college roommate had been dead since 2019. There had been the new password on his laptop. There had been the way he'd suddenly become very interested 2 years ago in updating the deed on the house and putting it in something he kept calling the trust papers I'd signed without reading, because Walter said reading them would just confuse me. At least 2 years, I said. Marian nodded. She wrote that down. Then she said the words that changed my life. Mrs. Holloway, in North Carolina, when one spouse moves marital assets into a separate entity in anticipation of divorce, that's called fraudulent conveyance. If we can prove the timing, if we can prove he was already planning the divorce when he moved those assets, we can claw them back. Every penny. I want you to understand what that word meant to me. Claw. It wasn't a polite word. It wasn't the kind of word Walter would have approved of at the dinner table. It was a word with teeth, and I was so unaccustomed to having teeth that I almost cried right there in that office. But Marian wasn't finished. There's a complication, she said. I want you to be prepared. In high-asset cases like this one, the spouse who's being defrauded often discovers that members of the family have been pulled in. Adult children, trusted friends, people who signed paperwork, people who let him use their address, people who hold a fractional interest in something so it doesn't look like his. I thought about our 3 children, Wesley, the oldest, 52, an investment banker in Atlanta, Caroline, the youngest, 48, a pediatrician in Raleigh, and our middle one, Adelaide, 50, who lives in Asheville and has dinner with her father every Sunday. I thought about how, in the past year, Adelaide had bought a vacation cabin in Boone that I'd always wondered how she could afford on a part-time real estate salary. I think Marian saw it on my face. She didn't say anything. She just slid a yellow legal pad across the desk and said, "Write down anybody you can think of. We'll find out." I drove back to Bernie's house that night, and I sat on her screened porch with a glass of sweet tea I couldn't drink, and I let myself, for the first time, look at the last 2 years of my life as if I were watching it happen to somebody else. And what I saw was a betrayal that wasn't one person. It was at least 2, maybe more. The first time my middle daughter called me after I left, she didn't call to ask how I was. She called to tell me I was making a mistake. "Mom," Adelaide said, her voice the same voice she'd used when she was 9 years old and trying to convince me she hadn't taken the last cookie. "Mom, Daddy is so hurt by all this. He just wanted a clean break. He's willing to give you a small monthly stipend. You don't need to drag this through court. You'll make the family look terrible." I was sitting at Bernie's kitchen table when she called. Bernie was standing at the stove making a grilled cheese sandwich. Neither of us was going to eat. I put the phone on speaker without telling Adelaide, and I watched my sister's face while my daughter explained to me in great detail why I should accept $500 a month and a 1-bedroom apartment in Black Mountain and consider myself lucky. When Adelaide finished, I said, "Sweetheart, did your father tell you to call me?" There was a pause. The kind of pause where you can hear a person deciding whether to lie. "No," she said, "but he mentioned that you might be upset, and I thought I should reach out." I said, "I love you, Adelaide. I have to go now." I hung up. Bernie turned off the stove and came and sat down across from me and said, "Eleanor, I think Marian's going to find your daughter's name on some of those papers." I nodded. I didn't say anything. I sat there at my sister's kitchen table at 76 years old, and I let myself understand that one of my 3 children had helped my husband steal from me, and that if Adelaide had helped, there was a real chance Wesley had too, because Wesley was the one who knew about money. Wesley was the one who, when he was 14, sold his own bicycle to a kid down the street for twice what we paid for it and laughed about it at dinner that night, and Walter had laughed too and said, "That's my boy." The investigation took 6 months. I'm going to spare you the legal details because I lived them and they almost killed me. But I'll tell you what Marian and her forensic accountant, a quiet little man named Theodore who wore the same gray cardigan to every meeting, found. Walter had moved $4.5 million in marital assets into a holding company called Beaver Dam Ridge Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware in March of 2022. That was 22 months before he served me with divorce papers. The company had 3 listed members: Walter Holloway, Wesley Holloway, and Adelaide Holloway Petrie, my oldest son and my middle daughter, Caroline, my baby, the pediatrician, wasn't on it. When Theodore showed me the documents, I asked him to point to the signature pages. I wanted to see my children's handwriting. I wanted to see if they'd hesitated. If you knew Adelaide's signature like I did, I'd watched her practice it on the back of church bulletins when she was 12, trying to make the loops on the L's just right. You could tell she'd signed quickly, confidently, like a woman who'd been waiting for the pen. Wesley's signature was even faster. Wesley had signed in 2022 and again in 2023 on an amended operating agreement that increased his ownership stake. Walter had been very generous with his oldest son. The total value of the assets Walter had moved came to $4.5 million. Our house was in there. The lake property was in there. 3 retirement accounts I hadn't even known existed. A storage unit in Greenville full of guns and gold coins, of all things. Walter had been buying gold for 11 years and had never once mentioned it to me. I want to tell you that I felt rage. I want to tell you I broke things and screamed. I didn't. I sat in Theodore's little office and I felt the room get very far away, and then I felt very calm and I said, "Marion, what do we do now?" Marion, who had been waiting for that question for 6 months, opened a folder and slid it across the table. "We file a motion to dissolve the LLC," she said, "and freeze every asset inside it. We file a complaint for fraudulent transfer under North Carolina General Statute 39-23. We name your husband, your son, and your daughter as defendants, and we make them give it all back." I sat with that for a minute. "All of them?" I said. "Even my children?" Marion looked at me. She wasn't unkind, but she wasn't soft either. She said, "Eleanor, they aren't your children right now. Right now, they're parties to a fraud. If they want to be your children again later, that's a conversation you'll have later. But right now, in this office, they are obstacles. Do you understand me?" I did. I understood her. I signed the papers. The day the suit was filed, I got 11 phone calls in 2 hours. Walter called 4 times. Wesley called 3 times. Adelaide called twice. And then, in the late afternoon, my youngest, Caroline, called once. I answered Caroline. "Mom," she said, her voice was shaking. "Mom, what is happening?" I told her everything. I told her about the LLC and Wesley and Adelaide and the gold coins and the cabin in Boone. I told her her father had laughed at me on a Wednesday afternoon and told me I would never see my grandchildren again. There was a very long silence on the other end of the line. Then Caroline said, "I didn't know." "I believe you," I said. And I did. She said, "Mom, I have to tell you something. Adelaide called me 3 weeks ago and asked if I'd be willing to sign something. I told her no without even reading it. She got angry and hung up. I should have called you then. I'm so sorry." I closed my eyes. I held the phone against my chest for a moment. Then I put it back to my ear and I said, "Sweetheart, you're calling me now. That's what matters." Caroline drove down from Raleigh that weekend. She brought her 2 little boys, my grandsons, Theo and Henry. They are 6 and 4. They climbed all over me in Bernie's living room and got crumbs everywhere and asked me why I wasn't living at Grandpa's house anymore. I told them Grandpa and I had had a disagreement and that grown-ups sometimes need to live in different houses. Theo, the older one, considered this. Then he said, "Did Grandpa say sorry?" I said, "No, baby, he didn't." Theo nodded very gravely, the way only a 6-year-old can, and said, "Then I don't want to see him." I cried for the first time since I'd left. Right there on Bernie's couch, with my grandson's small, sticky hand on my cheek. I cried because for 6 months I'd been afraid that the threat would come true, that Walter would find a way to keep them from me, that the laugh in the foyer would echo for the rest of my life. And here was Theo, 4 feet tall, eating a graham cracker, deciding for himself. The lawsuit dragged on for 10 more months. Walter fought it. Of course he did. He hired his own attorney, a man named Brent Carmichael, who had a reputation in Asheville for being a bulldog. Carmichael tried every delay tactic he could think of. He claimed the LLC was a legitimate estate planning vehicle. He claimed I had signed away my interest in the property when I'd signed those papers 2 years before. The ones Walter had told me would just confuse me. He claimed I had known all along. Marion destroyed him. She destroyed him with the timing. She destroyed him with the emails Walter had sent to Clarissa, the tax preparer, which Theodore had subpoenaed from the cloud backup of Walter's old phone. She destroyed him with the email Walter had sent to Wesley in February of 2022, 4 weeks before the LLC was registered, which contained the phrase, and I am quoting this because I will remember it on my deathbed, "Once we get this set up, your mother won't be able to touch any of it. She'll sign whatever I tell her to. She'll sign whatever I tell her to. I want you to understand. 51 years, 3 children, 2 miscarriages. I held alone in a hospital bathroom in 1978 and 1981 because he was at work. 44 Thanksgivings I cooked. 6 surgeries I drove him home from. The pneumonia in 2014 when I sat by his hospital bed for 9 days and slept upright in a vinyl chair because I was afraid that if I left the room he would die. And the man wrote in an email that I would sign whatever he told me to. The judge ruled in March. The judge was a woman named Honorable Frances Tate, and she had been on the bench for 26 years, and when she read her ruling, she did not look at Walter once. The LLC was dissolved. Every asset reverted to the marital estate. The court found that Wesley and Adelaide had been knowing participants in a fraudulent conveyance and were jointly and severally liable for their portion of the recovery. Walter was ordered to pay my legal fees in full. The house on Beaver Dam Road was to be sold and the proceeds split. The lake property was to be sold and the proceeds split. The retirement accounts were to be split. The gold coins, all 11 years of them, were to be inventoried and split. I walked out of the courtroom that Tuesday in my navy blue dress. I want to tell you the part I haven't told anyone. 3 weeks after the ruling, on a Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, an Asheville area code. I almost didn't answer. But something, I don't know what, call it whatever you want, made me pick up. "Mrs. Holloway?" a woman's voice said. "Mrs. Eleanor Holloway?" "Yes, ma'am, this is Detective Reyes with the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office. I'm sorry to have to tell you this over the phone. Your husband was found this morning. I'm afraid he's passed." I sat down on Bernie's kitchen floor, just slid right down the side of the cabinet with the phone against my ear. "How?" I said. "Ma'am, it looks like a heart attack. Sometime late last night. The woman he was living with, she found him this morning. The woman he was living with, she found him this morning. The woman he was living with, Clarissa, the tax preparer." "Where?" I said. "At a rental property on Hillside Drive. He'd moved out of his other residence after the court ruling. There was some financial difficulty." I sat on Bernie's kitchen floor for a long time after I hung up. Bernie came home from the grocery store and found me there, and didn't ask any questions, just sat down on the floor next to me and held my hand. Walter had died in a rental house. The man who had stood in our foyer and laughed at me and told me I would never see my grandchildren again had died alone in a rented bedroom with a woman who had only ever wanted what was in his bank account, which by then was almost nothing, because the court had clawed it all back. I don't believe in karma the way some people do. I don't think the universe is keeping a ledger. But I will tell you that I sat on that kitchen floor, and I thought about the dogwood tree on Beaver Dam Road, and I thought about the laugh in the foyer, and I thought about 51 years, and I felt, I want to say this exactly right. I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not grief, not vindication. Just a kind of long, quiet exhale, like I'd been holding my breath since 1973 and only just realized it. I did not go to the funeral. Wesley and Adelaide planned it. They called and asked me to come. They said it would look bad if I didn't. They said the family needed to be together. I said, "You weren't my family when you signed those papers. You don't get to be my family at his funeral." Wesley said, "Mom, you're being cruel." I said, "Wesley, I'm being honest. There's a difference. You'll learn it eventually." I hung up. Caroline came with me to the cemetery a week after the burial, when nobody else was there. We stood by the grave for maybe 10 minutes. I didn't say anything to him. I didn't have anything to say. I just looked at the headstone, which Wesley had ordered, and which described Walter as a beloved husband, father, and grandfather. And I thought about how a stone can lie. Then Caroline took my hand, and we walked back to the car. The house on Beaver Dam Road sold in July for $1.8 million. The lake property sold in September for $920,000. The retirement accounts came to a little over $1.6 million combined, split in half. The gold coins of all things came to almost $200,000. Walter had bought them at the right time, I'll give him that. By October of last year, I had, after legal fees and capital gains taxes, about $2.4 million in my own name for the first time in my life. I was 77 years old. I bought a small house in a town called Brevard, about an hour south of Asheville. It has a garden. It has a guest room for Caroline and the boys. It does not have a porch that wraps around. I didn't want one. I planted a new tree in the backyard the week I moved in. Not a dogwood, a Japanese maple, because Bernie said red was a better color for starting over than white. I don't speak to Wesley or Adelaide anymore. Wesley sent me a card on my birthday in May. I didn't open it. I put it in a drawer. Maybe one day I'll open it. Maybe I won't. Adelaide came to my front door in August. She stood on the porch and cried, and said she was sorry, and said she didn't understand at the time what she was doing, and said she wanted her mother back. I let her stand there. I didn't open the screen door. I said, Adelaide, I love you. I have always loved you. But you signed those papers knowing they would hurt me, and you watched me move out of my house, and you called me and told me to take $500 a month and disappear. I am not ready to forgive you. I may never be. You're going to have to live with that, the way I had to live with it. She cried harder. I closed the door. I don't know if I made the right choice. I think about it some nights. I think about how my mother, who died in 1996, would have wanted me to forgive my children. I think she'd be disappointed in me. But then I think about the email. She'll sign whatever I tell her to. And I think about how Adelaide signed those papers without ever once picking up the phone and saying, Mom, do you know about this? And I think, forgiveness is not a debt I owe. Forgiveness is a gift I give. And right now I don't have it to give. Maybe someday, maybe not. Caroline brings the boys every other weekend. Theo, who is now 7, has decided he wants to be a paleontologist. Henry, who is 5, is in love with a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Beans. We make pancakes on Saturday mornings. I am teaching them how to garden. Theo asked me last week if the Japanese maple has a name. I told him no. He thought about it for a long time, and then he said, I think you should name it Grandma, because it's strong like you. I almost cried again. I'm almost cried again. I'm crying more easily these days. Bernie says it's because the dam finally came down and now the river goes where it wants. I think she's right. I want to leave you with this, because I think it matters. When I was sitting on the edge of that Hampton Inn bed at 76 years old, with $312 in my checking account, I genuinely believed my life was over. I believed I had no power. I believed I would either accept whatever Walter offered me, or I would lose everything trying to fight him. I believed at my age, in my body, with my exhaustion, I did not have one more battle in me. I was wrong. You always have one more battle in you. You just haven't met her yet. She's the woman you're going to become at the end of this. And I want you to know, whoever you are, whatever Hampton Inn you're sitting on the edge of right now, whatever quiet laugh you can still hear echoing in your foyer, she's worth meeting. She's worth the fight. She's the one who plants the maple tree. I think about that Tuesday a lot, the Tuesday I walked out of the courthouse in my navy blue dress. I think about the woman who got into that car and drove back to Brevard, and I think about the woman who had sat on the edge of a Hampton Inn bed 10 months earlier with $312 in her checking account. And I want to tell you something I've come to understand at 78 years old. They were the same woman. They always had been. The only thing that changed was that one of them finally believed she existed. Walter didn't die because the universe punished him. Walter died because he had spent 51 years building a life on a foundation of dishonesty, and when the foundation gave way, his body gave way with it. That isn't mysticism, that's cause and effect. A man who lies to his wife for 2 decades, who teaches his own children to sign their names to a fraud, who laughs in a foyer at a woman he once promised to love, that man is already dying. The heart attack in the rental house on Hillside Drive was just the part the coroner could put on paper. And Wesley and Adelaide, my beautiful, intelligent, ruined children. They aren't suffering now because I cursed them. They're suffering because they made a choice, and choices have weight, and the weight of helping your father steal from your mother is a weight that bends a spine. I didn't have to do anything to them. They did it to themselves the day they picked up a pen. What I want women my age to know, what I want anyone listening to know, is that there are 3 things you have to hold on to, and you have to hold on to them in the right order. The first is honesty. Not the polite kind, the kind that lets you sit at a kitchen table and finally say out loud after 51 years that you never once looked at a bank statement. Honesty about yourself is the door. You can't walk through any other door until you walk through that one. The second is wisdom, which is just honesty applied to other people. When Bernadette asked me on the phone whether Walter had ever let me see the statements, that was wisdom. She wasn't accusing me of being foolish, she was helping me see what I already knew. The world is full of people who will help you stay blind because your blindness is convenient for them. Walter built his life around mine being convenient. Wisdom is learning to tell the difference between a person who loves you and a person who loves what you give up for them. And the third is courage. Plain, ordinary courage. The kind that gets in a car at 76 and drives to Charlotte. The kind that signs the legal complaint even when your daughter's name is on it. The kind that closes the screen door while your child cries on the other side of it. Because love without standards isn't love. It's surrender. Caroline brought the boys last weekend. Theo named the Japanese maple grandma. I sat under it and watched my grandsons chase each other across the grass, and I thought, this is what I bought with $2.5 million and 10 months of my life. Not the money, the right to sit here, the right to be myself, finally, at 78, in my own backyard, under a tree that knows my name.